When I sold my IT services company, I thought I knew exactly what my business was worth. I had an accountant, I had 3 years of clean financials, I knew my EBITDA number to the dollar, and I walked into that first serious buyer conversation feeling like I had the upper hand. But I was probably misleading myself. The buyer didn't spend 30 seconds on my EBITDA number. They knew that already from the information they'd received prior to the call. What they spent 45 minutes on, the thing that determined whether I walked out with the number I wanted or left money on the table, had nothing to do with my income statement or financials. It had everything to do with something most IT service owners have never thought of, let alone optimized for. And here's the thing that still gets me. Every owner I talk to is spending years trying to grow revenue, cut costs, and hit some EBITDA target they read about in an article in some magazine. Meanwhile, the thing that actually drives your exit multiple is often sitting right in front of you, quietly working against you. And today, I'm going to tell you what that is and what to do about it. Hi, my name's Rory McCaw. Welcome to Self-Made Strategy. I'm a serial technology entrepreneur. I built an IT services business, a fairly large Microsoft consulting practice. Started it in 2001 and exited in 2018 for more than 8 figures. And I'm here to share my tips, my experiences with you, any tricks I've learned along the way to help you achieve a greater level of success faster than I did. So let's dig into it. Let me take you back to the early days of building my company. We were, as I just said, a Microsoft-aligned IT consulting and managed services firm. We were based in Toronto, but most of our market was North America. We did very little, in fact, work in Canada. We weren't a small company. We were probably mid-market. We weren't huge either. We, at our largest point, were just north of 40 employees, and we had somewhere north of 400 clients, most of them well-recognized names that you'd see commercials for on television and that you'd recognize from various marketing or social media marketing activities. We had strong recurring revenue, we had a great team that I was very proud of, and we had a phenomenal reputation in the industry and within Microsoft that took me and my team 16 years to build. By every metric, I feel like I understood the business and it looked strong. Revenue was growing, margins were healthy. I'd been through the Microsoft partner programs, built out service delivery, hired people who knew what they were doing. We had A players on the team. On paper, it was a very compelling story, and we weren't hiding anything. When I started thinking seriously, though, about an exit, I did what most people do. I worked with my CFO. We pulled together 3 years of clean financial statements. I worked with an M&A advisory group specializing in selling Microsoft consulting businesses, services businesses. We together calculated the EBITDA and then looked up what other IT services firms were selling for, and it was somewhere in the 3 to 6 times multiple range, depending on who we talked to. We did the math. I had a number in my head. That number felt pretty real to me in terms of what the business was worth and what the market would justify. The problem is that number wasn't how buyers were thinking about my business at all. And here's the catch. EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, tells a buyer what your business earned last year or the year before. That's it. It doesn't tell them what it'll earn next year or the year after, or whether those earnings are defensible. And when a buyer is putting 8 figures on the table, defensibility is everything. And you have to be able to defend your numbers and your growth and your targets. What they're actually buying is a cash flow stream. And they're trying to figure out how reliable that stream is without me or you in the building. EBITDA doesn't answer that question. What does? Two things, and they work together. The first is your monthly recurring revenue quality, not just your monthly recurring revenue number, but the composition of it, specifically how concentrated it is. What percentage of your total MRR sits with your top 3 clients or your top 1 client? We had a client, I won't name them, but they were a great client. They were a loyal client, a client I'd worked with for more than 5 years with the business, who represented somewhere around 20% of my recurring revenue. To me, that relationship felt like a strength. It was stable, it was profitable, we had history, but to a buyer, it was a potential liability. So in due diligence, that number came up immediately. It wasn't buried in a footnote in the financials. It was a first meeting, and the question wasn't, tell us about this client. It was, what happens to this deal if this client doesn't renew under new ownership? That's a completely different conversation, and I wasn't 100% prepared for it. The second is what I'd call key man dependency. Not just whether the business can run without you, every buyer asks that, but whether the relationships can survive without you. In a services business, especially in IT services, relationships are often personal. Clients trust you specifically. They bought into you and what you sold them about your firm. And when that's true, it shows up in the due diligence, in the client interviews, in the way your team answers questions when you're not in the room. So together, MRR, your monthly recurring revenue concentration, and key person, key man risk are two variables that compress your multiple faster than anything else. They're also the two variables almost no owner is actively managing in the years before they go to market. Here's where planning comes in, and what I tell any IT services owner who's thinking about an exit in the next 3 to 5 years. 18 to 24 months at a minimum before you start thinking about talking to buyers and putting together your pitch deck and pitch sheet. You need to actively de-risk your client base. That means two things to do in practice. First, set an internal concentration ceiling. No single client should represent more than 10 to 12% of your monthly recurring revenue if you can help it. If you have a client above that threshold, and a lot of us do, because those big clients feel good, they're profitable, they're easier to service most of the time, you need a deliberate strategy to either grow the rest of your base faster or have an honest conversation about what that relationship looks like in a potential transition of ownership. That doesn't mean firing the client. That's the last thing I'm saying here. It means building around them, winning 3 or 4 new accounts specifically to reduce that client's proportional weight. Running the math on what your MRR mix looks like when a buyer pulls up a concentration report, because they will. Second, you need to document the institutional knowledge that currently lives in your head. Every relationship you own personally, every client who would call your cell phone first, map them, then start deliberately transitioning them. Introduce an account manager. Start copying that person on emails. Include them on phone calls and meetings. Move from being the relationship to being the oversight of the relationship. Do it slowly enough that clients don't notice, but intentionally enough that 12 months from now, when a buyer asks your team, who owns the XYZ account, the answer isn't Rory does. It's the account manager does. And leverage AI in this effort as well, because as you're thinking about all of the things that are in your head, share that information with the AI engine of your choice and start creating these brain dumps and repositories of knowledge that others in your organization and eventually the purchasing company can actually continue to leverage once you've transitioned out. So I was fortunate enough that I started this process about 24 to 36 months before starting down talking to the M&A advisory firm. And my top client concentration came up in every serious conversation, but we managed it with the help of my M&A advisory team and some coaching that they provided. And I'll tell you how we did that in a minute. And I didn't lose any negotiating leverage in the process, so you don't have to either. And that's the key takeaway here. There's a third lever I want to mention that almost no one talks about as well, and that's the tech stack modernization. So in the IT services world, specifically, buyers are paying a premium for businesses where the recurring revenue is tied to modern, scalable tooling or infrastructure, typically these days cloud-first infrastructure, current security stacks, RMM platforms that don't require heroic manual effort. So if your MRR is generated by keeping legacy on-prem systems running and you're not working with those customers to transition them or have been working with them to transition them to a new tech stack, you have a bit of a risk in terms of your valuation, and you want to start definitely moving those customers in that direction of tech modernization. Otherwise, buyers are mentally discounting for the migration risk that they'll inherit. And that's a multiple conversation, not a revenue conversation. So in my case, fortunately and gratefully, the deal closed. The outcome was fantastic. But if I'm honest with you about what it took, when the concentration issue came up in due diligence, we, luckily, thanks to our advisory team, were prepared and able to address it. The buyers never asked for an earnout provision tied partly to the retention of any client in the 12 months post-close. That's not common. You've definitely got to plan ahead to avoid any type of earnout conversation in your deal or negotiation. And any lack of preparation may not kill your deal, but it may require you to stay on and have an earnout period. And your performance in that earnout period may impact what you end up getting for your business. An earnout means you're still carrying performance risk after signing the papers and transferring ownership when you have less control over how the business operates, but you're still being held to certain performance criteria that you need to hit in order to earn the earnout and the price that was negotiated and in the signed documents. That's leverage I didn't have to give up thanks to planning and guidance from my M&A advisory team. I de-risked ahead of time, and that client relationship risk was taken care of 18 months before we went to market. So the lesson here is not to think about the exit value in and of itself or exclusively around an EBITDA number. Think about the consolidation risk, the client risk that you have in terms of the amount of revenue that any one client is bringing in. Think about the importance that you have currently in your business leading into taking that business to market and de-risking that by involving others in the operation and relationship management elements. And also think about what tech stack your clients are working on and how modern that is and relatively easy to maintain as opposed to difficult and risky to maintain and transition through new ownership. Every operational decision you make in that 18 to 24 month window leading up to going to market is either going to add or discount to your multiple. That MRR, concentration, key man risk are critical to stay on top of. And they're often the first thing a serious buyer looks at and that will use to determine whether your multiple is truly 3 or 6 times. So remember, EBITDA is a baseline and everything else is a negotiation. What I'm grateful for having gotten right was I had clean financials, we had documented processes, we had great service delivery models in place that didn't collapse the moment I stepped back because I was never involved with the operational elements of the business leading into the transition. A disorganized business with good revenue is still a nightmare to acquire, and buyers pay for certainty and a well-run operation, even if they have some warts. Signals certainty. Well, when I went to market, I identified my risks and I took deliberate actions to reduce perceived purchaser risks. I spent a great deal of time thinking about my business and the way a buyer would be thinking about it. Being inside the business for so long can make it difficult to see it from the outside. Those top clients can feel like an asset operationally, which it was, but to a buyer running a discounted cash flow model with client attrition assumptions, it looks very different. And the downstream confirmation, every IT services owner I've talked to who's been through an exit, either as a seller or on the acquiring side, says the same thing. Concentration and key man risk are the two most common reasons a deal gets retraded or an earnout gets structured against the seller. It's not a Rory problem. It's a sector-wide blind spot, and a good M&A advisory firm will point this out and make you aware of it in the early stages so that you can take proactive action and avoid it. So here's the takeaway you can carry forward. If you're an IT services owner who's thinking about a future exit, even a vague someday kind of exit, start running a monthly MRR concentration report right now. Not for a buyer, for yourself. Because the moment you can see that number clearly, you'll start making decisions differently. That single habit is probably worth more than any valuation multiple conversation you'll have with a broker or a potential buyer. If this video and the content I've shared landed for you or with you, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the channel. I try to release a video a week, and it's all grounded in real-world experience building and selling an IT services company. I'm not here to BS you, provide fluff or theory. These are all things that I've been through, and I'm just happy to share, hoping that you can achieve a greater level of success than I can. Good luck in your journey, and we'll see you in the next one.